Okay, we're starting with the broadcast, everybody.
Done, Simrat. Start broadcast app done.
Okay.
Please go ahead.
All right. A very good afternoon to everybody joining us today. I am Simrit and I work as a research associate at Alliance for an Energy Efficient Economy. And I want to thank everybody for tuning in for today's webinar on implementation strategies for India Cooling Action Plan, which is being hosted by India Cooling Coalition. In today's session, we intend to hold a comprehensive discussion on different aspects of Icap, including, first of all, the objectives and recommendations of Icap. Secondly, the strategy for its implementation, including the diverse role of different stakeholders. And thirdly, how Icap can deliver the socio-economic benefits, which have become essentially important as we combat the COVID-19 crisis. 2 days ago, we had the news coming in that India's economy in the first quarter of 2020 has shrunk by around 24%, which is alarming to say the least. And the socioeconomic ramifications of this economic downturn are going to be significant, especially for the vulnerable sections of the society. So these are some of the questions that we hope to disentangle in today's webinar. We hope to make this discussion as interactive as possible. So I would encourage all the participants to kindly submit your questions in the Q&A window that you see on your screens. We'll get to that at the very end of the webinar. Before I invite our first speaker, we actually have a question for the audience here, which should be now coming up on your screen. The question is that which of the following is a goal laid in the Icap for sustainably managing the country's cooling demand by 2037-38? And you see 4 options on your screen, and I would encourage everybody to please submit your responses. Maybe I'll give this another 10 to 15 seconds before we close this poll. All right. We have the results here. So an overwhelming majority of the respondents believe that it's all of the above, which is actually true. The Icap envisions to reduce cooling demand by 20 to 25%, refrigerant demand by 25 to 30%, and cooling energy requirement by 25 to 40% in the next 2 decades. Thank you, everybody, for submitting your responses. Without further ado, I will actually now introduce our first speaker, Mr. Shubhashish De, who is the Associate Director of Industrial Buildings and Cooling Program at Shakti Sustainable Energy Foundation, and I invite him to give the welcome address. Mr. Shubhashish, I would also kindly request you to give a brief about India Cooling Coalition to our participants. Over to you, Mr. Shubhashish.
Thank you, Simrat. So I take it's my pleasure to welcome you all for the first webinar organized by the India Cooling Coalition. The webinar is expected to provide an opportunity to comprehend the need, significance, and implementation progress of India Cooling Action Plan. For those who are unaware, the India Cooling Coalition is a multi-stakeholder group led by representatives from not-for-profit organizations, think tanks, academic institutions, and industry associations. The coalition started its journey in 2016 and was instrumental in popularizing various concepts. To say a few, the concept on lean, mean, and green development, the universal thermal comfort for all. At the same time, a number of coalition members contributed to the drafting of India Cooling Action Plan during 2018 and 19. The coalition was formed not to do research activities, but to build a consensus and share a concerted view of different multi-stakeholder groups in front of the policymakers. And the coalition had been successful in providing those insights as and when it was required. As Simrat has already stated, that today we are standing at a critical crossroad of history, a time which people generally encounters once in his or her lifetime. We are challenged with COVID-19 crisis at once. The economic downturn is unprecedented. So these are the two critical internal challenges we are facing today. At the same time, we are seeing looming clouds of border disputes in and around our northern and western borders. The economic growth has shrunk by almost 24% during the first quarter of the financial year 2020-2021. In such a condition, the central and the state government understandably will be more concerned about the economic recovery, employment generation, and health-related activities and initiatives. In such environment, the environment and climate-focused organizations like us have to be more sensitive to the current realities, and at times may have to change or alter our short-term strategies. To make our voice heard, we must make ourselves relevant to the current priorities. Only becoming a part of the solution here, we can be able to save our future from a threat of climate change. Towards this, several organizations who are also members of this coalition have decided to take the first step forward. They have drafted a combined letter, and it is addressed to the Prime Minister's office. Within this letter, they have offered their services to the Government of India to facilitate a green economic reset instead of a fossil fuel intensive economic recovery, which would have an unintended environmental consequence. The letter is still available with us, and we are yet to submit the letter officially to the government authorities. So here I take the opportunity of requesting all members to come forward and contribute and endorse this brave initiative taken by this not-for-profit organization. With these thoughts, I would like to welcome our honored guest, Ms. Keeta Menon, Joint Secretary, Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, Mr. Abhay Bakre, Director General, Bureau of Energy Efficiency, Ms. Lily Rihai, United Nations Environment Program, and she is also the coordinator of the global initiative, which is Cool Coalition. With any further ado, I would hand over the mic back to Simrat so that she can take the program ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shubhashish, for that introduction and setting the stage for today's discussion. I would also like to take an opportunity here to inform all the participants that India Cooling Coalition will be hosting a series of webinars on different aspects of Icap in the upcoming months. Actually, today's webinar is the first in the series of 6 to 7 webinars that will be organized. So watch out this space for more on that. Moving on, we have the esteemed Joint Secretary from Ministry of Environment, Forests and Climate Change, Ms. Keeta Menon, with us. Ms. Menon, firstly, I would like to thank you for taking out the time for today's discussion. As you heard from Mr. Shubhashish, India Cooling Coalition is a consortium of 19 organizations who are all working in the domain of cooling. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank MEFCC in taking the leadership for developing India Cooling Action Plan and for undertaking a synergistic approach where MOEFC worked with different ministries as well as think tanks in developing this document. We would like to hear from you today on what's your perspective on the need and significance of Icap and how the implementation process can be streamlined. Over to you, Ms. Menon.
Thank you, Simrat. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here today. And it's a pleasure, more importantly, to meet everybody, because it's almost as if we forgot that we all are in this team and we meet so very often. So it's a real pleasure to have this opportunity to meet each one of you. To begin with, on a lighter note, I must say that I never imagined that there could be a quiz on the Icap. And today I think I got to see that. And of course, it was very nice to see that everybody got the answer right. So obviously, we've done something right somewhere. And so thank you very much for sharing with us in the ministry aspects of our own work, which we never thought could actually come out like in the form of a quiz. But moving back to the subject at hand, a crisis like the ones we are facing now, the pandemic and the lockdown and the subsequent troubles that we as a society and as a country are facing, these very often also provide us a chance to reassess what we've done, maybe make a fresh start, to make a beginning, taking certain options and exercising certain choices that we might not have otherwise done. So a crisis in very many ways is, with all the pain and the difficulties it's brought before us, it's also a chance, an opportunity for us to reconsider what we've done, whether we'd like to just go on doing it the way we thought we should be doing it, whether we need to reorient ourselves. So I think this has been that one opportunity that has presented itself before us. And like Simrat did mention, as we try to pick up the strings and move forward, and the task of really reviving the economy, the main question is, how do we go about it? Do we go about it in the business as usual mode, or are there significant lessons for us? Are there opportunities for us to make critical interventions in some crucial areas? And I think as far as the area of cooling is concerned, sustainable cooling, and all of that under the umbrella framework of the Icap, I think this is a very, very important juncture where all of us meet as a community, dealing with issues of cooling and seeing how we reorient it in the days and years to come. So that really is what we should be doing now, because we have the Icap document. We obviously have a certain perspective. We know where we want to be 20 years down the line. We also know what it is that we should be doing, to achieve the medium, short-term, and the long-term goals which the Icap has. But most importantly, I think there are certain issues which we need to remember, which is that the whole issue of sustainability and the environment, and what we do in terms of the choices we make, how does it impact and affect the most vulnerable people in society? How do we ensure that moving forward, we are able to do it in such a way that the most vulnerable get the benefit of these cooling initiatives? Because I think there was another occasion in the recent past where we had a discussion of this kind. And the one issue that really stood out was that cooling really has no meaning in a country like India unless it has the benefits that it can offer, reaching every single citizen of the country, however vulnerable, however not empowered he or she might be. So I think that is something that needs to be at the back of our mind as we move forward. And the rest of it, I think we have the path easily etched out in front of us. I think we know all the key boxes to be ticked. We know about reduction of cooling load. We know about enhancing the energy efficiency. We know about using low energy alternatives. And we also know about sustainable technologies. You have the district cooling and new technologies and all of that. So I don't think it is the lack of awareness of these, but now comes the challenge when we are also, fortunately, I would say, at the implementation board about how do we link it for it to bring us the greatest possible societal benefit to those who are the most vulnerable. So I think this thought needs to inform our implementation agenda in the coming weeks, months, and years, because that is what will really make our cooling efforts truly sustainable in the long run. Else, I fear that, we may just step back to the whole thing of while we are doing the right thing by maybe providing good energy efficient technologies, are we really reaching it out to those who are the most vulnerable? So let us please keep that in the back of our mind as we go on in this whole process of implementation of our. So, as the Ministry of Environment and Forest and Climate Change, I think we have been saying this now for a while. The responsibility of having been the leaders when it comes to cooling action plan at the global level, it's something we recognize and we acknowledge. And while there's a great deal of pride, we also understand that there's a great deal that needs to be done. And that is where I think the role of this cooling coalition, where there is a coming together of so many think tanks, philanthropies, international organizations, I think it is a most welcome step, and I think it is a step that can help us chart this path as we go ahead. So I most certainly welcome this initiative of the cooling coalition, and I do understand that the experience of Icap is being used to develop a kind of a framework at the international level for other countries to sort of learn from and emulate when it comes to developing cooling action plans. And of course, it's a matter of great satisfaction and pride that we are able to, if we are able to provide that kind of leadership role. And I recall the statement made by our secretary recently during the London Climate Action Week, and the one point he made was that he would welcome any opportunity that the government of India would have in providing such a leadership role. And if other countries were to able, to pick up some kind of an action plan based on our Icap, I think it would be a extremely heartening achievement for us. And we would hope also that in the process, the Icap itself is able to grow and develop further with this kind of initiative. But what I particularly would like to highlight at this point is the cooling coalition itself is in very many ways symbolic of the Icap, because the Icap has been, the document itself has been all about building synergies, developing inputs from various stakeholders, and also developing synergies between various sectors. And I think going forward, the implementation way, the path for us to implement can also be only informed by this whole idea of synergies. And without that, I don't see the implementation process being able to move forward. So as the representative of Ministry of Environment, I think the cooling coalition and its whole focus on implementation is something we welcome wholeheartedly. We would look at it as a big source of support for us as we go on, in this whole process of implementation of the Icap. I would like to say that there are a few areas which, while in the process of implementation, we should continue to remain focused. And I would say some of these would be, of course, one is the thermal comfort for all, which is a key message that comes out through the Icap. Sustainable cooling, therefore, ensuring livelihood. So improving chances of, livelihood advancements wherever that is possible. I think this should be an important part of our focus area while we go through the implementation. Similarly, access, for instance, to cold chain technology in such a way so as to benefit the most vulnerable in terms of access to medicines, these become particularly critical at this point of time as we are going in, hopefully with the development of a vaccine, and not just for the present, but I think this is a concern that would be very much in the horizon for years to come. So if we can come out with effective implementation strategies that not only provide the best and the most efficient cooling technologies, but also build into it features that ensure that it becomes easily available and accessible. So I think that could be yet another focus. And undoubtedly, something which was mentioned by the earlier speaker, we have at this point of time concerns in our country about our self-reliance. Make in India, of course, is something that we have been, focused upon. But in the most recent past, the whole slogan of Atmanirbhar Bharat, I think it also is something that should be a guiding principle for us as we go around in the process of implementation of the Icap. So, encouraging, strengthening indigenous research, indigenous technologies, indigenous capabilities. I think this also needs to be a very, very important part of the entire Icap implementation strategy in the years to come. So this would be broadly the areas. Apart from that, I think we have some of the authors of the Icap here on the panel, so I don't think we need to really get into the details of what are the medium, short and long-term plans and where we wish to reach in terms of each sector. But while we do that, let us come out with concrete, actionable, doable points which could be then taken on and replicated at a large scale, reaching to the widest possible sections of society and encouraging a revival within the Indian economy. I think this should be the guiding principle along which we take the implementation of Icap. So thank you very much once again for this opportunity, and I hope to be associated with the subsequent rounds of discussions that we have, where we probably get into more sector-specific issues. I look forward to that. Thank you very much once again, and I wish a very, very successful and fruitful interaction in the course of today's webinar. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Menon, for those profound insights. I think we've all benefited from how you talked about that concrete action plan right now is important, and that we have a very unique window of opportunity to actually tie together economic recovery and the goals that have been set in Icap together. You, I think, are absolutely right in mentioning that we have only one half of the battle with drafting the cooling action plan, and we do have a long way to go. But nevertheless, I would say that Icap is a stellar reflection of India's leadership and strong political will in coming up with a comprehensive action plan for sustainably managing the country's cooling demand. In fact, with Icap, India became the first country to ever draft such an action plan, which in itself is quite an achievement. So thank you for taking out the time for this discussion. We also have with us Mr. Abhay Bakre, who is the Director General of Bureau of Energy Efficiency with us today. Thank you, Mr. Bakre, for joining us for this discussion. Bureau of Energy Efficiency has several flagship programs such as Standards and Labeling Program, Energy Conservation Building Code for residential and commercial buildings. And we also have the DR and DSM programs where cooling technologies are involved, which is important for enabling thermal comfort for everybody, as Ms. Keeta talked about. Mr. Bakre, if you could provide your insights on what you think is the relevance of Icap in the current times and how we can go about while implementing the strategies that have been laid out in Icap. So over to you, Mr. Bakre.
Yeah, thank you, Simrit, and good afternoon to all the panelists, and a very good afternoon to all the attendees. In fact, I could see more than 180 now, and it's really very wonderful response that which has come to this webinar organized by India Cooling Coalition, and let me congratulate the this event for so successfully being attended by the all the stakeholders here. So let me just pick up then Simrat what you told, and then I'll come back to the main issue and what Madam Keeta Menon highlighted. So as you have seen in last 2 months, in fact, if you see the numbers, what the Bureau has published in terms of our annual report, which is the impact study we every year we do it. For the 18-19 alone, it's more than 156 million ton of CO2 savings. Now, mostly they are coming from the appliance side as well as the industry side. Now, what are the takeaways for that? On one hand, we have an energy efficiency as a great movement being supported by the consumer from the demand side. Especially, it's a demand side initiative. It's not like the supply side where we can plan long-term things like hydro plants or solar plants. It's mostly the consumer-oriented initiative, which has to change depending on the consumer need. We have to see what is the day-to-day technology upgradation, etc., and what is the best solution to be offered for the customers. So in that regard, when we could see that the appliances have more than 45,000 crore savings, then the industry has got almost 35,000 crore saving. Then the LED alone has got more than 20,000 crore saving. So put together almost 90,000 crore worth of savings per year is happening in India only for the energy efficiency measure. Now, what does it indicate? It really indicates that we are at the juncture where we have a huge opportunities in this area available for the next 10 years at least. And when I come back to our discussion, and very rightly pointed out the earlier speakers, as we come out with the current situation, a very difficult situation today, but we need to come out with a much different way. We should not come out exactly the way we were before. We have to come out, whether you call it as a green recovery, whether you call it a sustainable recovery, whichever name we call it. But we have to come out. This is the opportunity that when we go back to our business as usual, it should be entirely a different business. And this is where the opportunity, as I say, available. Recently, we had many such discussions, webinars, even up to the energy ministers level. I'm sure they have been happening on the environment side also. But the energy ministers have totally agreed. They said that it has to be kind of a green recovery. Some of the ministers even quoted the situation 2008 and 2009 when the carbon emissions were coming down, and again when there was a recovery somewhere in 2009-10, the emissions again picked up, and now the world leaders don't want that to happen again. The emissions have come down for whatever reason, but then when we are fully with our business, and we should have all possibilities to reduce the emissions. That is the first global will and global objective. If we see the India Cooling Action Plan, a very articulated document, as just now you also said that it's a vision, but at the same time with a very clear actions available. It gives a lot of numbers, a good analysis in all sectors, all possible areas, the potential available, and it gives a very clear action plan, which stakeholder what is supposed to do in which area and within what time. Now, it gives a much more easy task for B, because if we basically go by the past experience, and B has only about 15-year experience, practically, we have seen many schemes, some of them successfully implemented, some of them very well responded by the customers from the beneficiary side, and some of them perhaps taking more time. So now we have a clear view what is available in front of us, and what is what are the numbers and the target groups. So now coming precisely to the cooling action plan, we have the energy demand as the biggest parameter here. We believe that the cooling requirement will be a single area where the energy efficiency has to focus in with the highest priority, because cooling is the demand side initiative, where especially the country like India, we have a long way to go. Maybe today's situation where we have now every household electrified in last 2 to 2.5 years. Now the next thing will be in next 10 years or next 5 years itself. Most of them will be asking for the refrigeration. They will ask for refrigerators, and slowly they will be going to the air conditioners as well. There may be some water coolers and other cooling appliances. All this will happen in next 8 to 10 years, and perhaps by 2030 we will be having perhaps 1/4 of our families using air conditioners in the country, and maybe almost half of them may be using the refrigerators. What if then where will the energy demand has to meet? Well, the refrigerant demand has to come. Then all these things, we have a very vibrating industry to respond to that. In fact, we had from BES had 3 or 4 rounds of discussion with the refrigerating industries in terms of what are the challenges they are facing. They have put forth many issues in the current scenario. And the discussions have been, as Menon very clearly said, on the what is the priority? Can we have what kind of Atmanirbhar Abhiyan, if we can follow it up? What kind of opportunities we can leverage within the country for domestic manufacturing, upgradation of technologies, new models, new technologies, and as you know, the global cooling reward, which is happening with the intention to have the most efficient air conditioner for the country. It also gives a new opportunity for us. Bureau is looking forward that we can have new models, new technologies for the air conditioners in next 2 to 3 years, which will be tried and tested within India, and so that we can have its own upgraded program to address the cooling challenge in the country. We have seen such successes in the past. I was trying to analyze where are the areas that we have past experience in a much effective manner, and what is the opportunity available now, which can also see or replicate similar thing. If we talk about a very important industry like automobile industry, the government, the DPIIT, and the heavy industries, they came out with a very elaborate vision about the auto policy and auto vision, and it was almost somewhere towards the end of first decade of this millennium, and around 2009-10, and they had a vision of what will happen in 2016, 2020, etc. If we recall, somewhere in late 80s or early 90s, the purchase of car was really kind of a luxury. We had seen that only some of the few cars only perhaps purchased by either corporates or maybe employees or senior employees who are actually having a kind of vehicle loan, etc. But for a common customer, the car was not a kind of a thing which he will immediately purchase. Perhaps if he is going to purchase it, he will purchase it for lifetime, perhaps 25 to 30 years of. But then we are not in that situation. Today, car is being purchased by almost every person who is joining his job or any new assignment in 2 to 3 years, and they are also getting fast replaced in 4 to 5 years. It is entirely different situation, and it has happened only because of major push on domestic manufacturing. A lot of tier 2, tier 3 industries have come. The sales have come. Now we can see a car showroom in almost every small town or city. We can see a car mechanic almost in every remote area. This has changed in last 20-25 years. And I think I can see the same thing happening in air conditioners, which is much simpler commodity, much cheaper commodity, I should say, having less cost and much needed. Maybe car can be a luxury that every person need not require it, but a kind of a cooling requirement, whether it's even if you start from fan or air cooler or maybe small air conditioner or refrigerator, these are going to be the necessity in most of the households in coming 10 years, and especially when the electricity is available and with much the reliability being improved, because Now the country has a surplus power. Our installed capacity is growing every month. We already gone to a level of 385 gigawatt, as against the peak demand itself is of 180 gigawatts. So now the reliability will not be an issue. The availability of electricity to the remote areas will not be an issue. So in that case, every household will like to have an air conditioner. So what I can see based on the India Cooling Action Plan, whether if we talk about the air conditioning alone, I can see an air conditioning dealer available with almost small villages, air conditioning service centers available in such areas, and the customers at every part of the country will have a facility available to use air conditioners, and maybe the same thing will happen in case of other appliances. And this is what I can see, and it will have a lot of opportunity for the domestic manufacturing. And in fact, yesterday when I had a meeting again with the manufacturers, they are very much excited for that, and they are committed. They say we will make the India as well as the global hub for energy efficient or super efficient air conditioners. Let me also highlight one small area that some of our neighboring countries, they are very much keen. In fact, I don't want to name the country. They came and we are going to sign the MOU. They were really worried that whenever Bureau is upgrading our air conditioners, and the Indian consumers are going for 3-star, 5-star, and so the 0-star and 1-star are left on. They are pushed to their countries because they are our neighbors. So now they want to sign an MOU that whenever we are going to have a higher efficiency air conditioners, automatically their minimum criteria will also be improved, so that the inefficient appliances are not pushed to neighbor countries. So this is one aspect that India can have a leader role, not as a supplier to the neighbor country, but they can become an export hub for energy efficient air conditioners. And that is where I can see an impact and the opportunities available from India Cooling Action Plan. Finally, if I see the other areas like cold chain is one area where the things have just started. The things have just started. We are coming out with a report. In fact, that is also developed in association with AEEE about the cold chain sector. We have huge opportunity. That system, that supply chain and area will really get developed with domestic manufacturing, new systems, new opportunities available, and the constraint of availability of supply, electricity supply, power supply, will not be there for that application, and that will have a very positive impact on developing the cold chain. It is also possible for the transport air conditioning, as we have the domestic manufacturing being improved. We will have better air conditioners. Most of the vehicles will have a much improved technology, and the non-air conditioned vehicle will be perhaps a thing of past almost, and we will have a much improved vehicle experience in the coming years. In all, if we can see that the domestic manufacturing will be the key thing, I think the industry is aware about that, and with a lot of positive push from the government side, the political will, and the customer response, I believe that the cooling industry will have a transformation in coming for 5 to 8 years, and we will have a lot of things happening at domestic front. We will have new technologies coming about, and finally our industries and the manufacturers will be able to not only fulfill the demand, the growing demand of our country, at the same time they will be in a position to make the best product which can be exported to other countries, and we can very much fulfill not only our commitment on whether it's a Paris Agreement or any other international protocol, but we will make our own recovery in a much greener and sustainable manner, thereby offering a much better solution and comfort level to all the citizens of our country. Thank you once again, ICC, for inviting me, and it's really a pleasure for joining all of you. Once again, thank you so much, and good day to all the attendees and the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bakre, for your wonderful insights. I think you're absolutely right in mentioning that with India's rising population, rapid urbanization, and growing aspirations of the Indian middle class, we are going to see an exponential growth in the demand for cooling technologies. And this is the right opportunity for us to think about how we can sustainably manage that. And also with the ratcheting up of the energy efficiency standards for air conditioners, I think we are on the right path. So thank you once again for sharing your thoughts with us. Before I move on to the next speaker, we actually have another question for our audience here, which you should be able to see on your screen now. So the question is, what do you think is the most important and unique characteristic of Icap? And you have 4 options here. Please submit your responses. All right, I am now closing it in 5 seconds. Okay, so here are the results. Around 34% of the respondents are of the opinion that clear targets for energy, greenhouse gas, and refrigerant reductions is the highlight for Icap. And the highest response is for option D, which is India's leadership at global stage in developing Icap. Thank you for your responses. I think this actually provides a great segue for our next speaker, which is Miss Lily Riahi from United Nations Environment Program. Ms. Lily is also the coordinator for Cool Coalition, which is a global effort led by UN Environment, the Climate and Clean Air Coalition, the Kigali Cooling Efficiency Program, and Sustainable Energy for All. Ms. Lily, I think the audience would love to hear about the Cool Coalition and its agenda, and we would also love to hear you speaking about the significance of national cooling action plans in the global ideation of cooling. So over to you, Ms. Lily.
Thank you so much, Simrat. Sorry, my voice seems to be gone from speaking too much. Is there a way to share my screen?
Yes, I've just given you the control. You should be able to share your screen now.
Okay. Can you see the screen?
Yes, we can
PowerPoint?
see your screen. Yeah.
Presentation? Okay, great. All right. So thank you so much, first of all, for inviting me to this webinar, and thank you so much for the International Cooling Coalition for giving me the opportunity to speak here with all of you. I think the first thing I wanted to say is also thanks to Ms. Keeta, Menon, and that of MOEFCC for their leadership in setting the inspiring example on how to tackle cooling challenge comprehensively through the development of an NCAP. The Icap, as Ms. Menon has mentioned, is indeed a major building block of the global international methodology we are building in the Cool Coalition under 4 national cooling action plans with AEEE and other partners. And I will go through that a little bit later in the presentation. But I want to say that we are not the only ones that think that India has done a stellar job. India Action Plan has actually received the praise of the Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, as you can see in this slide. And I think that's quite significant and speaks to the work that's been done. Clearly, he's also made a call to action on the development of national cooling action plans globally. And I guess that many of you here, I mean, you're all experts on cooling. Some might wonder in the industry or from private sector, some might wonder why the development of and implementation of a national cooling action plan, or ICAP in the case of India, is seen as so important in the global community, since there's so many different policies that can be taken and actions that can be taken to make an impact. So today I will try to answer that question, why NCAP is crucial to tackling the cooling challenge, and in particular how the Icap has helped us developing that model and helped us in answering the call of the Secretary General, which is to accelerate national cooling action plans for all countries. So just to give the background as to why we have prioritized national cooling action plans at the international level as UNEP and as the Cool Coalition, I think it's just important to reiterate that cooling is definitely a multi-sectoral issue. Most of you I have no doubt, been sweltering through the summer heat waves. If you've had air conditioning, it's probably cranked up to get a good day of work or to get a good night's sleep. And of course, what most people think about when they think of cooling is the space cooling, but it's of course much more than thermal comfort. It's also, as the previous speakers have mentioned, very much about protecting vulnerable populations, keeping food fresh from the farm to the fork, and keeping workforces productive, and in particular medicine viable, which will be indeed particularly important in the delivery of the COVID-19 vaccine. So, oh, it says it's showing my Word doc. One moment, I have to show you. Can you see the presentation? I'm getting a comment that you're not seeing my presentation.
We can see your presentation.
Yeah, we can see your presentation now, but we were seeing your talking points earlier. I think.
Okay, so I'll just stay on the slides then. Okay, thanks. Okay, so then, so I mean, clearly what I'm trying to say here is that we need to improve, in order to actually achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, we're going to have to improve and expand access to cooling. But on the other hand, and currently there's still a significant number of people that don't have access to cooling. There's significant food loss and food waste, and significant impact on the productivity of many countries due to lack of access to cooling. And so, but then on the other hand, of course, improving access to cooling means that you have significant challenges to achieving our goals under the climate agreement, as well as under the Sustainable Development Goals. So obviously, we know from the IEA that there's going to be a significant increase in cooling demand over the next 3 decades. So by 2050, a tripling in cooling demand. And that is said to be the equivalent of, and that's just for AC, that's just for air conditioning, space cooling. And that's said to be the equivalent of the demand of all of India and China today for power consumption in general. And that means that it's going to undermine all of our efforts to switch to renewables and decarbonize the grid. So that is one point that needs to be really taken into consideration. We can't turn to renewables to green this demand alone. On the other hand, you have a significant amount of ACs continuously being bought. I think it's something like 10 per second or something. It's incredible over the next 3 decades. And consumers, of course, are not turning to the most efficient ACs, and that is not about price, or it's not about technology either. It's really about policy. So that's another point. And of course, if we continue with business as usual, we're going to have significant costs in terms of power generation investment that needs to be met, as well as upstream, as well as distribution and transmission costs. So for all these reasons, of course, we have to consider how to expand cooling without, heating the planet. And so what is it that we think could do that? Well, when you look at the science, I mean, the most recent synthesis report from UN Environment and the IEA that was released, one of the most important things is linking the HFC phase down to linking the refrigerant transition and energy efficiency. So we know that the HFC phase down under the Kigali Amendment can achieve a 0.4 of avoided warming by 2100, and actually coupling that action with energy efficiency could double those benefits. That's not a small achievement. And if you look at the numbers globally in the next 4 decades, if we were to start to do that today, based on 2018 levels, we could avoid 4 to 8 years of GHG emissions. So that's a really big, important point. And I think, and of course, it's a mix of solutions. It's not only energy efficiency, it's really taking a comprehensive approach. And that is where I think the National Cooling Action Plans come in, because they allow for a comprehensive approach to be taken to link the various solutions and to link energy efficiency to the refrigerant transition. So, and that is where we have India's Cooling Action Plan as the first one that was published globally, and by far the most comprehensive. Of course, there's many other countries that have done an excellent job, but India's is the most far-reaching, has really set an example on tackling the cooling challenge. And here what you see is that, you know, what we've taken from the India Cooling Action Plan is, of course, well, first of all, why do you need it? As was the question at the beginning, why do we need this for the cooling challenge when there's so many policies you could just do? You could just implement minimum energy performance standards or building codes. Why do this plan? But I think, as we all know, you can't really improve or manage or direct where you're going if you can't measure it. And so, of course, the first thing is that you have to assess the cooling requirements, refrigerant demand, and energy use, which the India Cooling Action Plan has done for the next 20 years. As I mentioned, it allowed coordination of efficiency and refrigerant transition interventions. So, for example, retooling manufacturing lines, you know, why not do that at the same time? That is saving costs for everybody. And there's other many interventions that can be coupled like that. Looking at mapping the technologies that are available over the long term and opportunities that are not always evident in the short term. So, for example, I know that in the India Cooling Action Plan, the impact of the building sector, or for example, fans as a solution, was not really evident until you looked at the midterm scenarios. So, you know, if you just do policy looking at short-term analysis, you don't see that kind of impact. And being able to look at the whole picture, how to reduce demand, how to look at both refrigerant-based and non-refrigerant-based technologies, how to shift to renewables, and how to improve efficiency. This is an important task that the India Cooling Action Plan has set as an example to others. And of course, aligning existing policies and programs. So many countries, and again, India was an example in this, have, you know, building codes or minimum energy performance standards, or, I mean, policies for renewables, or policies for, I mean, you know, I don't know, urban heat island effect, and so on and so forth. I mean, how to bring all those ministries, all those policies together and align them so that you can have the maximum impact. As I've heard Dr. Satish Kumar say many times, you know, the Cooling Action Plan was not in India a new policy document, but was very much building on existing policies and programs, but it aligned those. And I think that's extremely powerful in terms of achieving a comprehensive approach. And finally, the multi-stakeholder framework. And that, I think, was also a very big winning point from the India Cooling Action Plan. It sounds very easy to say, let's do multi-stakeholder collaboration, but as everybody on this call knows, and it's often a challenge to bring together, even within ministries. Sometimes it can be a challenge to bring together who's working on different topics, you know. And cooling is so multi-sectoral; you really need to work across the different ministries, but then also, of course, with civil society and the private sector. And I think that you know, initiatives like the Cooling Coalition in India are also contributing significantly to that and allowing for implementation. So this framework is very important. So from that, we've really been able to learn a lot from the India Cooling Action Plan and take these best practices forward in order to develop a model. And this model is being developed with the leadership of the Alliance for Energy Efficient Economy, as well as support from KSEP, the Kigali Cooling Efficiency Program, Icap, and is being done under the framework of the Cool Coalition. With UNEP, we are doing it also in collaboration with other entities who've developed NCAPs in other countries. So you can see UNDP, Energy China Foundation, World Bank, SE4All, CLASP, and so on and so forth. And we're now developing this model methodology so that other countries who are interested can actually follow the approach that was put forward by India. And what you can see on the right-hand side is we're already piloting this approach in Cambodia, and Indonesia has requested also for support, and will be the next country we'll be working with. So I think it's a really beautiful example of South-South cooperation, and how the leadership of India in this area has really translated into global action on cooling. What I want to mention is, of course, the work we do with others, with the framework that we're developing, is learning also on some best practices, including being very flexible, having a living document that continuously evolves with new technologies, with new data, with new development, new research and innovation. Also best practice from the Icap. It's quite flexible so that it meets the countries. Not every country, of course, is going to be like as large in terms of its cooling demand and market as India. So of course, it's very flexible to be adjusted to the scope of the country, but it does promote that every plan should not only look at space cooling, but should look at also cold chain, vaccine and agricultural cold chain, should also look at process cooling, mobile air conditioning and access. And then it's up to the country to decide what's their priority, but the baseline should be there. Of course, other things like demand assessment baselines and scenarios, intervention scenarios over the long term. So in the Cool Coalition, there we launched the Cool Coalition actually it was an official outcome of the Climate Action Summit. And the main aim there is to collaborate on the transition to sustainable cooling, efficient climate-friendly cooling, and contribute to these Sustainable Development Goals, Kigali Amendment, and Paris Agreement. So actually quite similar to what the Cooling Coalition aims to do in India. So that I think there'll be good room for collaboration there. It's a voluntary platform with about 100 partners and 30 countries, and it's led by UN Environment Program. And the main aim there is to do knowledge exchange, outreach, science, and joint actions. So some examples are, method, and these are areas that we can collaborate on also to support Icap implementation or to learn from further actions in India. But we're developing urban cooling methodologies, renewable energy for cooling best practice, cold chain methodologies, and so on and so forth. So those were just some examples. And we will be doing South-South exchange and trainings on how to develop these NCAPs based on the model that's developed from the India Cooling Action Plan. And so therefore we hope that we can really solidify collaboration between the India Cooling Coalition and the Cool Coalition to respond to the Secretary General's call and help countries adopt NCAP. And so with that, there's a few ideas of how we may be able to work and collaborate. And I think we've heard the Cooling Coalition say that they are the India chapter of the Cool Coalition, so reflecting India's leadership. Of course, as I mentioned, we can work together on best practice and do South-South exchange like we have already on the Icap, but we can also support areas for implementation, such as, I know urban cooling and cold chain are big areas. I know there was also some comments about manufacturing that was made earlier by Mr. Bakker about this being a very big, important area of action. So we can, of course, also support in those areas with our partners. And of course, we do a lot of work on how to link cooling action with COVID recovery. And finally, what's interesting is that the Green Climate Funds, we had a webinar and we have a recording of it. If you wish to visit, it's on our website. But the GCF actually has shown interest on supporting their countries for readiness on national cooling action plans, in addition to MEPS, minimum energy performance standards. So this webinar was one where we discussed actually the role of NCAPs and how their NDAs can be supported with that in the readiness phase of GCF. And furthermore, how there's the investment component of GCF is also supporting very much sustainable cooling. So given that India is leading on this already. Not only can GCF help us scale up to other countries and caps, but also it can help perhaps in some of the implementation actions that India wants to take. So I think that's with that, I'll come to a close and say thank you so much for inviting me to this, and I hope we can be in touch and work together on. Please feel free to contact me for the Cool Coalition, and I also, of course, Atul Bagai, who's the head of our India office in UNEP, as well as my co-lead Sophie Laurent. So thank you for that. I hope I didn't talk too fast.
No, thank you for that insightful presentation, and congratulations to Cool Coalition for now having more than 100 participants. And I think you're absolutely right in mentioning that now the repercussions of a warming world are being felt all over the world, and governments all over the world are now focusing on delivering efficient and climate-friendly cooling. And we also resonate with your thought that coalitions can play a good role here. We actually have another question for our audience here on cooling coalitions. Just give me a second. There you go. So the question is that what should be the role of cooling coalitions globally or nationally to mitigate the climate impact of rising cooling demand? Requesting all the participants to kindly submit your responses. All right, closing it in 5 seconds. There you go. Here are the results. 25% believe that it is they should focus on awareness at citizen, business, and government level, and 30% each believe that it should be for devising policies for faster adoption of technologies and for sharing best practices on sustainable cooling practices. All right, thank you for that. We now move on to the panel discussion for today's webinar, which is on the significance and implementational strategy of Icap. I would now request Mr. Shubhashish Dey to kindly take the chair and moderate this session. Over to you, Mr. Shubhashish.
Thank you, Sibrat. So today we have 3 eminent speakers with us who are also the part of this India Cooling Coalition. And as Ms. Keeta Menon has already mentioned that they are also involved in drafting the Icap document. So we have Dr. Satish Kumar from AEEE, Ms. Sikha Basin from the Council, and Mr. Karan Mangotra from TEDI. Incidentally, we also have 2 very important guests with us, Dr. Amit Love and Mr. Samir Pandita, and we would love to hear a few words from them after this panel discussion. So what I would request to each panelist that if you could conclude your remarks maybe within 6 to 8 minutes. And with that, I would request Dr. Satish Kumar to speak on his topic. The topic is what is the implication of Icap on national and international policy initiatives. Thank you. Over to you, Dr. Kumar.
Thank you, Shubhashish. It's an absolute honor and a privilege, and I would like to acknowledge the support of Shakti Sustainable Energy Foundation over the last 4 years in supporting this coalition through its various phases. And it's a real delight to see Madam Keeta Menon, Mr. Abhay Bakre, and Lily Riahi talk about the importance of the Icap, and also I think how its impact is being felt and utilized across the globe. So definitely a really proud moment for the India Cooling Coalition and all its partners who have worked towards that. So I will like to just have a quick presentation. So Okay, oops. Let me just see if I think there was. Can you just share that? Okay. I am sorry. Just asking for some. Okay. Just give me. Subhashish, maybe I will request Shikha, because it is saying that I cannot share my screen until I quit and join back again. So maybe you can start with Shikha and then I'll come back, because it looks like I have to change some preference to start sharing my screen. I'm really sorry about it. I think it's just giving me this message. So please excuse me for for the next presentation.
No worries, Satish. So it's a learning phase for all of us as we keep on attending this kind of webinar. So I would request the next speaker, Ms. Shikha Basin from the Council, and the topic of discussion is what are some of the socio-economic implications of Icap and its significance for economic recovery in the wake of COVID-19 pandemic. Over to you, Shikha.
Thank you. Am I audible?
Yes, Shikha.
Great. So thank you so much, and my utmost congratulations, despite the technical glitch that you're suffering right now, Satish. On getting this entire really eminent bunch of people together to speak on something that we've all in our own little silos been grappling with for several months now. It's really, really interesting to have so many national and international experts on the same panel, and I know that we're joined by several civil society, industry, and research leaders as part of this audience. And my congratulations, of course, also to the Shakti Sustainable Energy Foundation for actually spearheading and leading these initiatives. So to just sort of highlight one of the points, to contextualize what the economic impact really we're talking about when we think of the HVAC segment, this is something that Lily hinted and alluded to, which was an IEA number based on the 2018 report, right, that spoke about the global stock of air conditioners in buildings. The numbers there tell us that 10 new ACs were to be purchased every second for the next 30 years globally. 10 new ACs every second for the next 30 years, right? That's the plan that the research and the public policy world was trying to get industry to respond to. And how are we expecting them to respond to it? With more and more sustainable technologies, with greater investments, in their supply chains and inventories, and of course, nudging policymakers to create the market readiness to be able to absorb newer generations of technologies, but also cater to this large market demand. And then suddenly 2020 happens, right? I think the sales data is still out on what the annual and then the next few years projections are going to look like when we're thinking now about air conditioning sales, especially with an eye to a second-hand and a third-hand market, which we know is increasing. But keeping in mind, again, the industry perspective, right? And I want to focus a little bit of my intervention on that and bring it closer home to India. There are three particular areas that I do want to highlight. One of them, and I'll start with the refrigerant manufacturing hub that the country is. India is one of the 5 largest global producers and manufacturers of refrigerants that are currently in use. We know that these refrigerants are going to go through a technology change. They need to become more climate friendly. These are ambitions that are shared not just by India, but globally, and not just by the politics of India, but also by the industry. This is what the Kigali Amendment has set forth, and India showcased immense amount of leadership in spearheading an entire third trajectory of a group of countries in how we were going to pace this down. One of the reasons why we argued for wanting a longer phase down period was, of course, or a longer start to initiate our phase down period, was to do with the demand that we were expecting in the country. The second and the more pertinent reason was really that, are we ready as a manufacturing country to create the R&D space, the manufacturing capabilities, and therefore ensure the jobs that these subsector of industries can actually cater to. COVID has placed quite front and center the need to think about growth from the perspectives of sustainability, but also with the perspectives of growth. So when we're looking at an industry, we want to see that there is growth in there. We want to make sure that that growth is sustainable, but we also, as a country, need to ensure that we're catering to providing jobs. The bottom of the pyramid and sort of the accessibility that Ms. Keeta Menon alluded to several times in her speech and in her interventions, I would like to make a caveat there that ensuring accessibility by way of the HVAC industry, yes, providing thermal comfort for all is one part of it, but almost an equally important part of it is to ensure that there are people who are benefiting from being a part of the supply chain. As an industry, are we doing enough to invigorate our supply chain, to be able to create more and more economic opportunities, not just for the largest players, but really for the small, medium, micro enterprises, and those that form at the bottom of the pyramid, and those that fall in an informal economy that is not even currently being captured by the labor market in the data that we put forward. So if we are the hub for refrigerants and we understand that there is a technology transition that is going to be at play, how do we start really thinking about what the financial risks are, what the operational risks are, and what the technology transition risks are for the large manufacturing sectors, but also for the small, medium, and micro enterprises that actually give a fillip to this entire supply chain. If we can start contextualizing our technology upgradations, looking to low GWP as the aim, but also maximizing where we already have the current manufacturing hubs in the country, which is essentially Maharashtra, Gujarat, Tamil Nadu, Punjab, and Haryana, and invigorate a training, a reskilling of the technicians who are currently factory workers or perhaps just assemblers. How do we start creating a supply chain that is not only able to cater to the Indian market in a much more extensive manner, but through concerted policy actions, we start looking to import substitution and start looking to become a part of the global supply chain. What is it that we really need to do for this? The first and foremost thing I think that needs to come through, and this is something that we've reflected on through previous research, which is that we need to have a medium to long-term policy certainty, not just for the technology transition, but also for aspects such as Make in India, for Atmanirbhar to become a reality. We need to have certainty in policy, not just a good to have signal or a headline. The second aspect is that the Bureau of Indian Standards needs to start making it needs to start standardizing the mandates when it comes to components and not just the overarching unit. We need to have a fast track window to develop and update the standards for alternatives to high GWP refrigerants. We need to create authorized benchmarks to reference these low GWP refrigerants and their usage. And I think almost one of the biggest lessons that we need to take from the India Cooling Action Plan, not just in its development, but also towards its implementation, is that we need to start minimizing competing policy mandates. We have to make sure that energy efficiency enhancements are aligned with the impending refrigerant transition. We need to ensure that building norms reflect the need for climate-friendly cooling or space comfort in order to generate that demand. And then we need to look to cold chain development that encourages manufacturing and the use of low GWP refrigerants. How are all of these things going to come together? you can create the right policy environment and you can create the right technology environment. But if you're not going to encourage demand, it's all just sort of going to lie there, and consumers are going to continue to act in a business as usual manner. So then we need to look towards public and bulk procurement programs. And of course, we have Mr. Bhakri over here with us, under whose aegis EESL has led some of the most interesting and largest bulk procurement programs when it comes to low GWP refrigerant procurements. We also need to speak to the consumers and the end users, not just in residential households, but also when we're talking about cold chain and we're talking about a health supply chain to those that lie at the other end of that spectrum, which is namely, constituting buying hubs for agricultural produce, but also things like hospitals and smaller clinics that, again, policies can come together to create collaborative platforms for. Finally, when I'm looking to the MSME sector, it becomes very important because India has already gone through phases of refrigerant transition. So we understand what the challenges look like, except now we're grappling with those challenges in an economic environment that is perhaps not the most conducive for a lot of profiteering in a wide basis. So how do we start thinking about which financial, operational, and technology risks do we actually prioritize? We have an entire economic recovery scheme that was announced back in May 2020, focused to MSMEs. How is it that the India Cooling Action Plan can take its ambitions and afford a matrix that helps us understand which are the particular subsectors that fall within the cooling domain that we should be looking to? We know that our foam industry was up for a complete refrigerant overhaul and a technology overhaul earlier this year. How is that sector actually doing? How are we grappling with trying to understand the data, the financial viability of a technology transition that has already been mandated on that subsector? So I think there's a lot of work also for the research and civil society and public policy institutions to sort of go beyond the projected growth and the big numbers, and the industry and sort of our regular stakeholders, if I can call it that, and look to the underdogs and how they're actually grappling with this entire economic recession. Speaking of the underdogs, several of you are probably aware that the council does a lot of work on the servicing sector. And we've recently come up with a few publications that have looked to standardizing trainings and also the institutional blueprinting for how do we establish a mandatory certification system. The idea, of course, behind both of these studies is very much the implementation of the India Cooling Action Plan's goal of formalizing this labor market, ensuring that good servicing practices are implemented across the board, and also ensuring a more dignified, respectful, and recognized job profile for technicians that are currently already employed by this sector. Another aspect within this that I would like to add is quite simply the competition that we can expect in the socio-political environment that we find. Just taking the current numbers of the training programs and the certification programs that are there in India, we anticipate that a 10-fold increase is going to cost us about 400 crores, to train and certify these technicians. Now, when we're talking about a figure like that, and we're talking about fiscal inputs that we're looking to, not just for training and creating the servicing sector readiness, which is something that the government has already agreed to do, but also in encouraging MSMEs, also in creating a Make in India blueprint for the larger segment of businesses that are already part of the HVAC segment. There are going to be competing trade-offs within the same sector's actors. How is it that the Cooling Coalition, and this is a question that I then have for you, Subhashish, and for all of my co-panelists and speakers over here, that how do we actually understand the trade-offs in supporting certain subsectors and subsections of these stakeholders when we're thinking about providing cooling and thermal comfort to all. And with that question, I'd actually like to pause here and sort of go back to Subhashish. Thank you.
Thank you, Shikha. Just for the sake of time, I would now request Karan to share his thoughts, and we would request Satish to speak next.
Thanks, Subhashish, and thanks, Shikha, for setting the context and laying out a lot of these things that are here. I will keep it very, very short, and let me start with first of all, thanking the India Cooling Coalition and IEEE to bring this all together. And now that Dr. Love is also here, I would like to acknowledge, his leadership under which the Icap was brought together. And enough has been said about, the things that have been good about the Icap as we move towards implementation. I think what it clearly lays out are three important parts: the short-term activities which have to be dovetailed into existing programs. So there is no need to start anything new, but to synergize actions. And I think Shikha did allude to that. And then the midterm and the long term, for which there has to be a more concerted effort around some things that can be done with existing programs, but some of the things have to be started new. We were, the COVID pandemic and the parts of techno-economic feasibility that were, there early on, but the COVID pandemic has brought in the aspects of social resilience into the picture, and the access to cooling and the impact it plays on the vulnerable communities is now much more pronounced. I think another thing to keep in mind before I head into my 5 points is that it's a very specific point on the strict lockdown that was imposed in India was actually at a time when the industry sales are the highest. And because of that, this particular year has been a little, if I can use the word, strange for the industry in terms of the sales. That has impacted some big numbers of their sales and stocks and all of that. So how do we bring them on? Keeping in mind this kind of a challenge that this particular year has brought, keeping in mind the larger perspective of the call for self-reliance, as well as the Make in India, moving from Make in India to Make for the World. I have 5 points to make, and I start with the global point around, the Icap is now being used as a guidance document to nudge many countries around the world to prepare their national cooling action plan and then start to see how they dovetail into their developmental aspects and interlinkages with a lot of other sustainability things, including climate change. My first point is around coordinated action, and how do we use some of the larger platforms like the G20 and G7, which represent a big chunk of the cooling part, to push for coordinated action, start with preparation of cooling action plans within each of the member countries. So that's the first thing that the Icap, and the Indian stakeholders could look at doing. The second part is around reducing cooling demand, and without getting into the numbers, I think now there is a pressing need to move to sub-national actors. And sub-national is both the government as well as the non-state. And the recent IEA UNEP reports have stated that reducing cooling demand has a huge role to play. We all know that. But in India, the building codes, and Satish has been involved in ECBC for a long time, the implementation at the state level still remains to be a persistent challenge. How do we, while keeping the push on the building codes, enable some of other subnational actions like, let's say, heat action plans or assessments around urban heat island studies to bring those people on board as well? This is one of the things that we could learn from the climate change side on, how a national action plan on climate change was, broken down to a subnational level to a state action plan, just to build that ownership within the subnational level. The third point is around, how do we make the most efficient appliance option the more preferred one? And Shikha did mention on that also. The price plays a huge role. Terry did a recent perception study, with a household survey, and found that price is of utmost importance. While people do understand the importance of energy efficiency, if the more efficient product is phenomenally expensive, even not even phenomenally expensive, even marginally expensive, the decision point is skewed. So while bulk procurement and all have worked, how do we also get a set of private buyers together to consolidate demand, so that we can meet some of this through even private models? And enough has been said around public bulk procurement, and we all acknowledge the efforts that have gone in behind both LEDs and ECs by BEE and ESL. The fourth point is around the understanding of technologies, the efficiencies and the refrigerants part is not fairly well understood. What is still to be understood better is the applicability of these technologies to the Indian context. And I feel there is a need to look at pilots and demonstrations for various kinds of technologies in various geographies of India. Every part, it will work and function differently. And that is to enable large-scale adoption, lest we make a uninformed choice and lock ourselves into something that we should not have. Terry did, and with the support of a lot of partners here, did start a platform for promoting innovative cooling technologies. It is, I must admit, did not fly as well as we had anticipated, but that's the nature of the new technologies coming in and having a streamlined process of pre-feasibilities. But I think as we move towards implementation, and as technologies play a key role, pilots and demonstrations will have a key role to play. And finally, the question that Simrat had also put up, civil society action has a huge role to play, primarily because it plays a crucial role in facilitating government through enabling policy action, in facilitating research for the financial institutions to better understand the kind of opportunities and the risks. And it also plays a very critical role in raising stakeholder awareness. So I think coalitions like the India Cooling Coalition, the one that has been facilitated around by SIF, there are the Cool Coalition of the UNEP, are key vehicles to enable all of this. And I think one of the last options there of it also helps us move away from duplicating some of the work that we have done, are extremely important areas where civil society can enhance. It already is playing a role, but can enhance its contribution towards the implementation. So I will stop there with these 5 points, and thank you again for inviting me to this webinar.
Thank you, Karan. So before I request Satish, so if you could hashtag the points which our fellow panelists have made. So that would go like this, that there is a hashtag on the livelihood generation, subnational action, affordability of the equipment, pilot and demonstration of projects, and definitely civil society action. With these hashtags, I would request Satish to build upon and share his thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Shamashi. Sorry, thank you, Subhashish. I am going to, I think can someone make me the presenter? I think it should work now, hopefully. Let me see, I'm still not, okay, yeah. Okay, so can people see my screen?
Not yet, Satish. Yes, it's visible now.
Yes.
If you could maximize the slide or take it to a slide few more.
I'm trying to do. Okay, can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, so I know that we are running late, and we would also like to hear from Dr. Amit Love. A lot of ground has already been covered, so hopefully I'm not going to repeat anything. Karan actually summarized 5 pretty good, I think, actions that we all can undertake in terms of implementation, and Shikha has already spoken about both, I think, the refrigerant industry's role and how that needs to be facilitated and both regulated and incentivized, and then also the role of like this livelihoods, job creation through the servicing sector and the training of the skilled workforce. So let me just say that when we look at this thing, sorry, I'm trying to move this thing out of the way. So we have talked about, I think, why all these things need to be balanced, and Mr. Bakre and Madam Keeta Menon have talked about it, but it's just that I think cooling is at the center of national initiatives, global commitments, as well as the inherent human needs to have thermal comfort, and Icap is a response to that. If I go to the next slide, so I think in terms of some of these things also have been talked about, but I would just say, just reiterate that in this, I think, difficult times when I think COVID-19 is at the top of the priority list, how can the work that has been done under Icap be aligned? Again, I think both Madam Keeta Menon and Mr. Bakre spoke about it. These are just a listing of existing policies, and already government is trying to adapt some of these policies as part of the India's stimulus package, whether it is affordable housing or I think whether it is the agri tech industry and what kind of incentives that can be provided for farmers to benefit from those policies, because they have also suffered through this pandemic. I think one of the other things that I also want to cover is that there are national and of course international initiatives. So Lily talked about the work that is getting done under Cool Coalition, and there are some pretty exciting things that she has listed out. And also for India Cooling Coalition, looks like there could be significant opportunities to collaborate. National cooling action plans also, I think, is she touched upon. So that also remains a pretty important area for a joint activity and collaboration. KSEP, although we know that I think KSEP has played a pretty significant role immediately following the Kigali Agreement. It's only, I think, in the next maybe 6 months that KSEP is going to start working in India. And I'm sure that with their experience of working in different geographies and in other economies, I think that will also be fairly significant and offer opportunities for many of the India Cooling Coalition partners to work on that. I've just listed GIZ initiative on cooling. There is a RFP that is out, which also sort of highlights that cooling has become a pretty central focus of many of the long-term initiatives and programs that different multilaterals and bilaterals are designing. And in that same spirit, there are definitely many multilateral initiatives on cooling that is being led by UN Environment, World Bank, Green Climate Fund, that all of that we heard. So it's not just that I think cooling is sort of just an India-focused activity, which is of course being ably led by, I think, government ministries, but there are a lot of other entities, I think, from multilaterals, bilaterals to international philanthropies, who are, I think, designing programs for interventions and for support in terms of the Icap implementation. So that's a very, very encouraging sign, and it also means that that it offers a lot of opportunities for many other organizations. So whether we are trying to work in outreach and communication, whether we are trying to work on technology adoption, whether we are trying to strengthen some of the policies. Again, I think some of the actions that different speakers have talked about before me. I think very briefly what AEEE has tried to do. So there is a Sheetal project which has been supported by Children Investment Fund Foundation, and Terry is sort of leading that group of organizations which is doing that work, and AEEE is part of that project together with CEW. But I believe that there will be many such projects that are going to be launched because Icap is a pretty massive exercise, and it will require, I think, participation and I think cooperation amongst all with their unique expertise and capabilities. There is, of course, I think from our own perspective, we work on buildings, we are working on cold chain. There was some reference that was made about this. So we are going to be working on, I think in the India's cold chain sector. Mr. Barclay talked about that. There is a report that BE and World Bank are going to launch. And of course, the importance of appliances, again, something that Karan mentioned. And also, I think as Lily mentioned, that the importance of not just room air conditioner, which of course all of us know is a very, very important appliance, but also I think in terms of the fans and in terms of the air coolers and other technologies that are going to play a pretty significant role. This is another piece that we have been working over the last 6 months or so, and a lot of information on Icap is available, and we have seen that I think a lot of information that is kind of getting shared. So this is kind of a visual response to some of the numbers that Icap has. The numbers are in the public domain, and we will be launching kind of a microsite where a lot of this information can be visually represented. So this is just a sneak preview of I think what we will be doing. Of course, once the ICC website and these things get launched, I think there will be links from that. But it's also another attempt to help the ecosystem at large. These are all going to be in public domain, and it will help I think researchers, non-profit organizations, government to start to slice and dice this data and use this information in the manner that individual stakeholder or like a group of organizations may be interested in. So this is something that is coming down the pipe. In terms of, I think, what are the way forward, it's not very different from, I think, some of the points that has already been mentioned. So, and I think I thought that pretty much everything that I want to say, Karan captured that in the 5 things that he listed out. So these are just nuances. I think if we are talking about implementation, so clearly capacity building, strengthening the hands of the state and local government is going to be fairly important, whether we are talking about ECBC implementation, whether we are talking about, I think, the urban or city heat action or cool action plans that we are talking about. Consumer awareness is something that is also fairly important. We believe that campaigns and communications are going to continue to play a significant role. And if consumers start to demand more efficient appliance, better buildings, not just with maybe Italian marble or granite, but also I think that we want thermal comfort to be a priority. I think developers will start to respond to that. And we are seeing some of this in another initiative that AEEE is currently working on, which is our global cooling prize and then solar decathlon, where we are starting to work with developers to design net zero energy and net zero water buildings, where thermal comfort is also at the center of it. So we feel that consumer awareness, I think working with students, working with developers, working with, I think, the people who are going to procure these appliances and buildings are going to be a pretty significant exercise. R&D is again something that we feel is going to be important, a pillar of the Atmanirbhar or self-reliant India. And we know that Department of Science and Technology is looking into those aspects. And also we feel that I think enforcement of the codes and compliances, whether it's ECBC or standards and labeling program, is going to be pretty significant. This is a little bit about the role of civil society. We have all talked about it. And these are some of the major buckets that again, Shubhashish mentioned, I think, in terms of the hashtags and other things. But this is, I think, whether we are talking about climate or cooling action, whether we are talking about advocacy, whether we are talking about raising awareness and running campaigns, I think we are coming together of the civil society organizations on a platform like India Cooling Coalition is quite a significant thing. And I was very heartened, I think, when I was talking about this to to Dr. Amit Love and also Geeta Madam. They said that this is a great idea, that I think we have something like this, because it really helps the government, and it simplifies, I think, their engagement strategy if we have built these kind of coalitions. So I'm going to stop here because I know that we have run over time. We would also probably like to take some questions because we had a tremendous turnout. Close to 200 people have joined this webinar, and we would, even though we are going a little bit above time, we would like to probably respond to a few questions. So I'm going to hand it back to Shubhashish and to take it forward.
Thank you, Satish. Before we hear to the questions which are asked by the delegates, I would request Dr. Amit Love to share his thoughts, mostly around the plans on implementing the Icap. The team members from AEEE, can you just confirm whether Dr. Love can hear us?
Shubhashish, we do see him on the panel, but
okay. Is Mr. Samir Pandita? You can see him in the panel. I can't see him.
No, Mr. Samir Pandita is not here. We do have Mr. Amit Love, if he can hear us right now.
Dr. Love, am I audible? This is Subhashish here. I guess we
to the Q&A round, and if we hear from Dr. Amit Love, we can then ask him to join.
Sure.
Because
sure.
we're
so I am unable to see the questions. If you could help me with how to see those.
I have those questions. I think I'll go ahead and ask the panelists.
That would be fine. We may restrict to maybe 5-6 questions because we are severely running against time.
Right. The first question we have is actually for Ms. Shikha Bhasin. Somebody is asking that, can we have a list of exactly what standards are expected to be made by BIS? And ISHRE can drive this process with BIS as an outreach partner of MOEFCC.
Sure. I mean, I don't have a really long list up ahead in front of me right now, but this is a conversation we'd be more than happy to take over, because this suggestion is actually coming from various industry interviews that we had conducted a couple of years ago to understand industry readiness to transition. And what we identified was that more than just, as Karan alluded to, the applicability of different refrigerants in various climatic zones, it's actually the different components and the references that are needed as technologies for those to come together and be adopted and adapted to Indian conditions that are necessary. So it's a really long list, but we'd be happy to work with ISRE and of course with other public policy centers to actually arrive at these references.
Okay. Another question we have from Mr. Shyam Nandan Prasad is that, can we work out annual action plans to fulfill the targets set for 2037 and 38? Any of the panelists would like to take that? Dr.
Sure.
Satish, maybe? Okay, yeah. Go ahead.
Satish can go ahead.
No, I think it's a pretty difficult ask, I would say. I think to translate this, I think because I think the consensus was that developing annual plans would become probably very challenging, at least at the MOEFCC level. So that's why they came out with this short, medium, and long-term plans. But clearly, I think if any particular ministry wants to break it down further, and also at the state and local action level, if more granular plans can be developed, those are possible, but maybe I think not at the MOEFCC level. I don't know, Shikha, you want to share your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, and I don't think that we should sort of bureaucratize the process further by turning it into an annual plan and, you know, kind of spend a lot of time on that, given that we do have, you know, sort of short, medium, and long-term initiatives that have been defined at a sectoral level, and given that there's so many of us you know, still working on what it means to implement the cooling action plan. Perhaps as one of the initiatives of the Cooling Coalition, you know, we could think about what does this really mean for the coalition in terms of arriving at a successful spot like 5 years later, in terms of actively supporting some of the targets that the cooling action plan has put into it.
All right, thank you, Dr. Satish and Ms. Shikha. Next question, I think probably Lily can answer this one. The question is that how could Indian and global stakeholders contribute to the formulation of the universal methodology of cooling action plan?
Thanks for the question. They can certainly be in touch, and we have a working group that is collecting inputs and reviews from the different stakeholders. So I think I had shared my email in my presentation, and I can share it with you as well again, or maybe in the chat box. I don't know if that helps. And they can be in touch with me, or they can also be in touch with Satish if they have his contact details, because I'm working very closely with Satish. So that would be another avenue.
All right, thank you. We will be sharing the details in case anybody needs to get in touch shortly after this webinar is over. I think we can have the last question for the day before we wrap up, which is, I think Karan probably alluded to this in his presentation, but somebody's asked that what is the role of civil society in creating a research and development framework for implementation of cooling action plans?
Karan,
Should I go ahead?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. I think civil society has a very, very important role to play, and comes from three main parts. One is doing the essential underpinning analysis, which facilitates policy creation. We are all from the civil society. We can't create the policy per se, but we can provide all the necessary underpinning analysis and the evidence base. So I think that is where the first role of civil society comes in. The second part that comes in is the importance of civil society in raising stakeholder awareness. So, you know, platforms like these, and consumer surveys, outreach campaigns is the second part where it brings into the second important thing that civil society can do, and bring a variety of range of experts together, be it national, subnational, international, the relevant ones together. And the third part that the civil society can play essentially is bring all the civil society together. And that is where coalitions like these come in together, so that, in our nature of work, sometimes we unintentionally intend to duplicate a lot of effort. So I think, platforms and coalitions like these bring in and pull in all the expertise that is required for an effective implementation of a plan or a policy or a document like the Icap.
All right, thank you so much. I think that wraps it up for the day. I would extend my thanks to all the participants who tuned in for the webinar. And like I said in the beginning, we will be having a series of webinars in the coming months, and we'll share more on that as we go forward. I also want to express my gratitude to all the speakers for taking out the time for today's discussion. In my opinion, it was as engaging as informative. So once again, thanks a lot, everybody, and have a very good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.